How do you know what you know and who told you so? The cultural basis of religion and knowledge. Part 1. Culture defined. We typically don't realize it, but most of the facts that we take for granted in our lives today, we did not figure out for ourselves. Someone else or society in general told us, and we accepted them as the way it is. In other words, we got the knowledge from our culture. This is useful because it allows us to learn more quickly. Without this principle, we would have to learn everything, every generation, as if for the first time. We would have no advancement in technology, the arts, or anything else. So let's begin by defining culture. Because we learn culture by experiencing it one part at a time, let's look at the definition of culture in the same way, one part at a time. Culture is a set of shared assumptions, drawn from common experience, and passed from generation to generation by means of acceptable behavior. Assumptions are ideas we hold without requiring proof and often without even saying them to others. Experience tells us what works and doesn't work, what is acceptable and what isn't. By directing and approving our behaviors, one generation passes culture on to the next without even saying it. If you don't know the culture you're in, you may find yourself in hot water. So it's important for us to understand how culture works. Remember, culture is accepted without proof because those around us accept it, and we often learn it before we're old enough to ask questions about it. We accept that someone else tested it in the past and that their conclusions are correct. Let's take, for instance, the direction you button your shirt. Men button their shirts and coats with the buttonhole on the left. Women typically button their tops and blouses with buttonholes on the right. Now, men, you'll have to take my word for this. It would be easier for a right-handed person to button clothes with the button on the right, allowing you to place your right thumb on top of the button and your index and middle finger below around the threads to manipulate. But through practice, you've learned to do it better with the left hand. Why? Because once, a long time ago, men learned that if they caught their sword hilt on their coat or flap when drawing it, that split second could cost them their lives. So now we button our shirts as we do without question, because others drew conclusions and swords in the past. New members usually get culture from other members without even discussing it. So how do you receive an idea without even discussing it? Think back to your school days. In the United States, the teacher might ask young students, as the teacher writes on the board, "Children, what is 2 plus 2? As many as think they know the answer begin to wave their hands to be called upon. Suppose the teacher selects a student, and the student says 5. What happens? Snickers roll through the class, and students continue to wave their hands until the teacher selects someone who says 4. All the hands go down. That's right, the teacher replies and writes the answer on the board. Or perhaps the student gets to come to the front and write the answer on the board. Now suppose we visit a classroom in Japan. This time the teacher says, "Students, write this on your paper. 2 plus 2. The teacher pauses to give students time to write it perfectly, each one comparing their copy not only to what the teacher wrote, but how the teacher wrote it. The teacher says, "Now, everyone write the answer on your paper." After everyone has had time to write on their paper the answer, the teacher writes the correct answer on the board. The answer is 4. Students check to be sure the answer is written the same way as the teacher's. Then all the children look around at each other and smile. No one knows who got or who missed the answer. What's the difference between these two lessons? In the U.S., the students were taught 2 plus 2 equals 4, and it's important to be first. In Japan, the students were taught 2 plus 2 equals 4, and it's important to be like everyone else. The U.S. was founded by people who were seeking to do things their way, and the land was first come, first served. Japan, by contrast, has been occupied by the same people for thousands of years, and cooperation was essential. There are 2 key phrases in our definition to make it culture and not just knowledge. First, the shared assumptions are accepted without question. That implies that people seldom consider for themselves whether they choose to believe them. Second, they are taught without discussion, meaning people don't even know they are being taught. This makes cultural ideas even more powerful because how can you reject what you don't know you learned. Let's discuss a few common statements and consider if we know them as fact or assumption. How about the Earth is round? You've been told this, but how do you know? We know it from satellite photographs, astronaut reports, circumnavigation of the globe, but long before these, mathematicians, solar eclipses, and other observations gave it away. Consider, if you will, this statue. It's a Shishi lion, and this one poses for us at the Forbidden City in Beijing, China. We know this is a male because the female is always posed with her paw on the child, symbolizing that she has power over the next generation. The male, by contrast, has his paw on the earth, symbolizing power over the world now. Notice the shape of the earth as perceived at least 200 years before Christ. But by that time, on the other side of the earth, the Greek mathematician Eratosthenes had already put numbers to the size of this ball. He noted from records that the length of shadows measured at the same time of day on the same day of the year from two identical structures located in different cities were different. He assumed that the sun was so far away that its rays must be everywhere, for all practical purposes, parallel. He had the difference between these two structures paced off, and using trigonometry calculated the circumference of the earth within 1% of what we know it to be today. And why not? Aristotle knew the earth was round. Pythagoras knew the earth was round. Hundreds of years before that, the prophet Isaiah wrote that God is the one who sits above the circle of the earth. And thousands of years before that, Job said that God stretches out the north over the empty space and hangs the earth upon nothing. Not only do we accept as fact that the earth is round, it is a fact that no civilization in history has been documented to believe otherwise. I won't take this long on the rest of these, but let's take another example. Fact or assumption. The traffic laws this afternoon are the same as this morning. That the laws are the same from minute to minute depends on everyone agreeing to them and obeying. We assume that everyone still agrees. Some assumptions are necessary, or we couldn't survive together. Gravity draws objects towards the center of the earth. This is not a human law, but a law of physics. We have tested it in many experiments and know it to be a fact. We live in the best country in the world. I hope each of you believes that about your country, but it is a matter of opinion. Your chair will hold you up. You probably didn't test it before you sat down, but that's because you've tested it or other chairs like it in the past with consistent results. This particular chair you may have initially assumed would hold you up, but now you know as a fact it will. Ideas can easily move from assumption to fact by testing, but we can also mistakenly think that we have moved to fact simply by familiarity. Life today evolved over millions of years from one single life form. It is a fact that fossils contain evidence not only of living organisms, but also organisms that do not currently exist. But how they got here is not scientifically verifiable. Scientists can only test how things work by experiments, repeating them over under controlled conditions. Anything about the past one-time events is only inferred based on a compilation of evidence and assumptions. The statement may or may not be true. It is a logical inference based on a narrow set of assumptions, but it is not a fact. Remember where the assumptions come from? One person passes them to another. The assumptions of one become the assumptions of another. People may have some facts in common, but it is assumptions that join them in a common culture.